Did you know that Austria-Hungary planned to sign a separate peace agreement with France as early as 1916? However, she had little chance of success in 1917, especially after the scandal known as the Sixth Affair. This would mean that Austria-Hungary could retain most of its territories, and the post-war world could change dramatically. Germany and Italy would certainly become ultranationalistic, but would not be able to divide the Habsburg Empire. If Austria-Hungary had surrendered a year earlier, it could have significantly changed the course of world history. This could have been Germany's betrayal by Austria-Hungary during the Great War. After the death of Emperor Franz Joseph I, his successor Karl I sought to lead the country out of war. King Charles I contacted his brother-in-law, Prince Louis Bourbon-Parma, who served as an officer in the Belgian army and later connected with the French government. The French conditions for peace included the creation of an independent Belgium and the liberation of Serbia from Austrian influence. All these points were accepted by Charles I. However, the plan failed because Austria promised Italian lands in the London Treaty of 1915, and Charles I believed the Italians did not deserve them due to their actions during the Great War. The main problem was that Austria-Hungary had to recognize Russian control over Constantinople, which significantly weakened its position in the Balkans. The Austrians hoped that the rivalry between Russia and Britain would eventually change the status of Constantinople to an international city. The Sixth Affair failed because it was unpopular. In 1916, the Central Powers seemed on the path to victory. Officially, he failed after signing the Brest-Litovsk Peace Treaty, which took Russia out of the war. This instilled hope for victory in Austria-Hungary and strengthened the Kaiser's position in Germany. In the end, Germany learned of Austria-Hungary's plans for capitulation when letters exchanged between Austria and France became public. Concerns arose in Austria-Hungary that Germany might invade to force the country to continue the war. This did not happen, but Germany strengthened its control over Austria-Hungary, establishing German oversight of foreign relations on behalf of Austria to prevent similar attempts to exit the war. As we all know, the Great War ended in disaster for Austria-Hungary. At that time, no one expected a complete collapse of the country. It was thought that it would lose some or even significant territories, but would still continue to exist. However, that turned out not to be the case. Now, looking back, one can argue that Germany's betrayal and exit from the war in 1917 would have been a reasonable decision for the Habsburgs. We also know that if the Austro-Hungarian Empire had done this, it would likely have been invaded by the Germans. It's interesting how this could have affected the whole world. It's hard to imagine how it could have happened, because if it were likely, it probably would have happened in our world. The fact that it didn't happen suggests a low probability of such an outcome. A more likely scenario would have been if the French Prime Minister Briand had remained in power. He was an interesting candidate, as he had expressed ideas about creating a European economic union back in 1929. His policy was based on peace and economic integration. Historically, he was succeeded by Alexander Roth, who signed a separate peace treaty with Austria-Hungary, leading to the failure of the Sixth Case. Another problem of the Sixth Case was the lack of clarity regarding which territories would be granted to Serbia and Romania. Technically, Italian lands were not mentioned, but it can be assumed that this was related to the Fiume Agreement in 1915. I would say that France could provide Serbia with all of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as give the Serbs all of Albania as compensation for the lack of additional Austrian territories. The reason for this is simple. The French could exert pressure on the Albanians, which would be preferable to prolonging the war with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which occupied vital resources that could be used to fight Germany. Serbia would hardly be pleased with such a decision, but they would have no other choice. In 1917, they were effectively driven out of the Balkans and became a government in exile. The Serbian forces took refuge in neutral Albania, prompting the Central Powers to conduct a friendly invasion and capture the Serbs. This confirms my viewpoint on why I believe Serbia will receive all of Albania. At that time, Albania was a principality ruled by Willem, the Prince of Albania, a cousin of William II. Since Germany was ultimately defeated and the German royal family lost their titles, it was illogical for a German ruler to govern Albania, and this is what happened historically at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 when Albania was forced to become a republic. This time, Prince Willem could abdicate the throne, and the Albanians might enter a personal union with the Serbs and Peter the Fierce. Considering that in 1917, Serbia did not control its main territory, they might agree to something to continue the war against Bulgaria. This resolves the question of the territories that Serbia will receive. As for Romania, I believe they could receive most of southern Transylvania, which would satisfy the Romanians, as in 1917 they were mostly under the occupation of the Central Powers. Thus, they could emerge from this war with additional territories. The last country worth mentioning is Russia, which claimed Galicia, but it was unwise to give it to them immediately, considering how far the Germans had pushed them back. The Russians could count on Constantinople as compensation promised to them by the French, so there would be no problems for now. Ultimately, Austria-Hungary will lose lands in favor of Italy. The Austro-Hungarian Empire did not perform adequately in the war against Serbia, which capitulated to the Habsburgs, and Romania, which also surrendered during the Great War. The Austrians would have to cede their lands to countries they believed did not deserve it. The incident with the 6 remaining powers not only angered Germany, but also caused discontent among the entire population of Austria-Hungary. The terms of Austria's capitulation were announced on March 24, 1917. Thus, Austria-Hungary decided to leave the war it had started, abandoning its ally Germany. This led to outrage among the Germans, and an invasion of Austria-Hungary became quite likely. However, Germany did not have the strength for this, and it had to choose. Either withdraw troops from France and Russia to deal with Austria-Hungary, or accept betrayal. I cannot say for sure whether the Germans would have invaded Austria-Hungary or not, so I will consider both scenarios. If the Germans do not invade, this may encourage Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire, the remaining members of the Central Powers, to also abandon their alliance with Germany and obtain favorable peace terms. In this case, they will face no consequences for such a step, and Bulgaria may expand its territories while the Ottoman Empire can avoid total collapse. Immediately after Austria-Hungary exits the war and Germany remains inactive, Bulgaria will follow suit, as France promises to return their lost lands in northern Macedonia, as it was before the Second Balkan War, and possibly parts of territory from Romania. This is because Serbia and Romania were unsuccessful in the Great War, while the Bulgarians dominated the Balkans. France will have to force Serbia and Romania to agree to these terms, for without France's support, these countries will not survive. Furthermore, France will need to free important resources that were directed to Bulgaria, where it cannot gain much benefit. France will be forced to impose this peace treaty and acquire more resources that can be used against Germany. Overall, France hopes to expand its borders at the expense of Germany. Not only Bulgaria, but also the Ottoman Empire will lose much territory, including Constantinople, but will retain most of Syria and Iraq. This will leave Germany alone in the war, and it can be assumed that it will soon be defeated. In the peace treaty, I would propose that France takes Alsace and Lorraine, and Ireland becomes a protectorate. Russia will take the Polish regions of Germany with a predominant Polish population and may possibly create a Polish kingdom. Since the United States has just entered the war, their ideas of self-determination proposed by Woodrow Wilson will not be accepted by Europeans, as the Americans have only been involved in the conflict for 2 or 3 months. Germany could potentially be divided into smaller states, which I believe would be a desirable outcome. France and Russia, since this is the most implausible part of the scenario, I see these plans being realized and Germany completely divided. In summary, Germany will not punish Austria-Hungary for betrayal, which will lead other Central Powers members to decide to leave the war, shortening it and resulting in a quicker victory over Germany. This is one possible ending of World War I, but the alternative scenario of Germany invading Austria-Hungary seems more interesting, so I will choose it. This action by Germany will make Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire think twice before leaving Germany, and they will remain at war, at least for now. As for Germany's invasion of Austria-Hungary, it will initially succeed, but ultimately face difficulties due to the mountainous front on both sides, complicating the advance of German troops. Germany's last hope will be a swift capture of Vienna to force Charles I to return Austria-Hungary to the war. Even if the Germans somehow capture Vienna, Charles III can simply flee to Budapest and remain there, where Germany cannot catch him and force him to surrender. However, Germany has an advantage. The Austrian population is dissatisfied with their country losing territory to states that did not prove themselves in the war. The Germans may try to arm these people and win them over to their side, which will lead to a civil war in Austria-Hungary. Nevertheless, I doubt this will be successful, as most residents of Austria-Hungary will likely be glad for the end of the war and focus on domestic affairs. In the end, Charles I was known as a reforming king, and he would have sought to reform and improve the country, which, in my opinion, makes the German campaign a complete disaster. Moreover, Germany was forced to withdraw troops from the eastern and western fronts for this unsuccessful operation, putting it in a 3-front war. The Entente has another advantage: Greece. I believe that the Greeks will likely enter the war as soon as Austria-Hungary capitulates, hoping to acquire Bulgarian and Ottoman lands. Historically, Bulgaria surrendered shortly after Greece entered the war, as they were pushed back on the Macedonian front. The High Command of Bulgaria ordered the soldiers to continue resisting, but these soldiers marched on the capital of Bulgaria, Sofia, and demanded an end to the war. I believe this situation will also repeat in this war, and Bulgaria will exit the conflict, opening the way to Constantinople, which I assume will also fall. This time, Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire did not sign a separate peace treaty, but were properly occupied, and therefore would lose much land and influence. Of course, this will delay Germany's final capitulation, making the realization of the self-determination aspiration voiced by the Americans more likely. Still, I expect the war to be shorter by a few months than it was historically, but Germany will ultimately be defeated in another way. Let me tell you about this. I have already discussed the peace terms for Austria-Hungary, and now I want to talk about how the Second World War might look. As for Bulgaria, I expect similar peace terms to be imposed on them as well. The Ottoman Empire will face a similar peace treaty as with Austria-Hungary, leading to the Turkish War of Independence. However, I do not think Mustafa Kemal will be able to win this war. The first reason is the absence of the Soviet Union, which, by the way, was never able to come to power. This is possible because after the February Revolution in Russia, a provisional government headed by Alexander Kerensky will emerge, and Nicholas II will be forced to abdicate the throne. Furthermore, just a month after this, Austria-Hungary will capitulate, and the provisional government will be able to use this as a political victory, assuring the people that peace and victory are near. This will significantly undermine the Bolshevik Revolution, which promised peace and bread to ordinary Russians. It seems that the war will soon be won, making support for the Bolsheviks less necessary. Another event that I believe will happen with the Russians is that after the capitulation of Austria-Hungary, the remaining Russian troops will be able to halt the German advance. Germany may never reach Ukraine, and after the capitulation of the Ottoman Empire in Bulgaria, Russia will have even more strength to suppress the communists and push the Germans back. This may prevent the rise of the Soviet Union, but not all news for Russia will be positive. Without the Soviet Union, Mustafa Kemal loses his largest ally, but Russia will also be unwilling to fight him as it seeks to maintain control over Constantinople, which was promised to it by France and Austria-Hungary. This means that Greece will win the Greco-Turkish War and gain all its claimed territories, while the Ottoman Empire will be left in a humiliated state. I have discussed all members of the Central Powers except Germany, and now let's consider the region. With the introduction of American ideas of self-determination, Europeans will not be able to seize as much as they would like. France and Belgium will receive what historically belonged to them, while Denmark will gain a little free land. As for the colonies, I see that Germany will lose its colonies just as it happened in history. As for Russia, I think the Russians will create the Polish kingdom, which will be an ally and submit to Russia. The first reason is that Russia was on the brink of collapse during the Great War, and even if they win in this alternative reality, they will still remain very unstable. Granting the Poles greater self-governance will temporarily satisfy them and free Russian resources to fight rebellions elsewhere, aimed at stabilizing the situation in Russia. For the same reason, I can imagine that Russia will make Constantinople an international zone, allowing Russia to use the port and freely pass through the Bosphorus. But without, Russia will have to occupy and control Poland, which will allow it to gain all the advantages without any negative consequences. If they establish international governance, this could happen. But I can't say for sure, so decide for yourselves. Another reason why Russia might create a Polish kingdom is the idea of self-determination, which would allow Poland, and thus Russia, to gain much more territory from Germany, including regions with a Polish majority. The German royal family is likely to lose its titles, and a state similar to the Weimar Republic may emerge, with the same restrictions on the army, military operations, and demilitarized zones. This will leave us with such borders in the 20s. But that's not all. Italy indeed received the Promised Lands under the London Treaty, but it will likely become ultra-nationalistic as the country's economy is in decline. Italy waged an expensive war against the Ottoman Empire in the 20th and 21st years, resulting in only Libya and some islands. After that, Italy became involved in an even more costly war, World War I. German ultranationalists may find themselves in a similar situation, and they could act much faster. This is because the Germans were outraged. In their eyes, they had won World War I, but the Austrians betrayed them and destroyed their chances of victory. Everyone in Germany was sure they should have won, but Austria-Hungary let them down. Therefore, the Austrian artist who fought on Germany's side in World War I can see his popularity rise in the 1920s. This Austrian, despite his origins, despised Austria-Hungary and dreamed of the unity of all German-speaking people. His hatred for Austria-Hungary and desire to unite Germans, as well as to rectify the consequences of the Versailles Treaty, would make him extremely popular. Perhaps the beer coup in 1923 will be successful and lead Germany to an ultranationalist state at the same time as Italy becomes one. The alliance between Germany and Italy seems logical, as both countries aim to destroy Austria-Hungary and conquer its lands. Serbia may also join this alliance, feeling betrayed by France, which only granted it Bosnia and Herzegovina.